It's Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, so you know what that means. It's time for another episode of Hashtag Event Icons.
Presented by Endless Events.
The show where you get to ask the icons of the events industry anything. So, you might be wondering, how do you get to ask questions? All you have to do is use the question panel on the right of GoToWebinar to submit your questions. Or you can hop on Twitter to submit your questions with the hashtag Event Icons.
We'll be answering your questions live during the entire show.
Before we get started, the more people we have watching, the better conversation we can have. So please help share hashtag Event Icons on Twitter and Facebook.
Just tell your friends to watch at www.event-icons.com.
Now, without any further delay, this is hashtag Event Icons with your hosts, Will Curran of Endless Events, Laura Lopez of Social Tables, and Brant Kruger of Event Technology Consulting.
Hello, everyone. Happy Wednesday. I'm so excited to be here with you all. My name is Liz King, and we are here for another great episode of Event Icons. This is my first time hosting the podcast, so I'm super excited to be here. I did get to co-host last week with Brant, so we're really excited to dive in today. We have two amazing guests. I'd like to introduce them to you. First, we have Peter Puhle, CEO and co-founder of SponsorMyEvent.com. And we also have Liz Cunningham, Vice President of Marketing at Nest Event Marketing. Hi, guys. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, Liz. Happy Wednesday.
Hi, Liz.
So glad to have you guys here. I'm excited to have this conversation today, specifically around sponsorships, which I think is one of the hottest topics in the events industry. We were just talking about how much competition there is in the events industry in terms of how many events an attendee can go to at a particular time, but also how many events sponsors are being pitched to all the time. So I think this is a topic that's going to garner a lot of interest. But we'd like to hear a little bit about the stories behind the two of you as well. So Peter, do you want to start? Do you want to tell our listeners a little bit about what got you into the events industry in the first place?
Well, for sure. I must say that for me it was not one point where I said, now I'm going to dive into the event industry, but it was more kind of on and off. So I started very early making music, organizing some kind of light shows, and that was probably the first time that I was diving my big toe actually in the event industry, in the sponsorship industry, because I needed some sponsors to make these shows happen, and so I was very naive. I was just reaching out to some companies, and I think at the end of the day I was very lucky just to get some sponsorship secured. Then it was more occasionally that I was working with some event organizers, organizing some events, switching a little bit the tables as well, and working as a sponsor myself, because I was running back then already my company, and I got involved in some sponsorship. So that was on and off, and it was only now 3.5 years ago where I started to dive in again, much deeper again in the event industry, which accumulated finally also or came to the creation of Sponsor My Event, and now today it's my full-time job, of course, to be involved in sponsorship and trying to make sponsorship happen for small and also bigger events and sponsors.
Liz, how about you? What got you into the events industry?
Nothing quite as sexy as what Peter just went through. I actually graduated from college and was working for a promoter who had a music festival and was planning on going to law school. He asked me to put together a sponsorship program for him, and I had no concept of what that entailed. 25 years ago, there wasn't a lot written about corporate sponsorship in the day, other than the reference point of IEG. And so essentially, I pretended to be companies and approached events and asked them what kind of sponsorship opportunities were available, and from there created a sponsorship program for an event. So kind of a backwards way of doing it, but it turned out to be quite successful.
And can you tell me more about what you're doing today and the work that you do?
I'm no longer posing as a fake company, so that's
it's always a move forward.
Right. Good to be real. Actually, right now, our company produces 20 music festivals throughout the U.S., Canada, and we have one in Scotland. And I'm in the process, I handle about 14 of the festivals. I work with them on incorporating corporate sponsors into their sponsor arena. I don't necessarily handle all of them on my own, but I tend to work with certain companies and help them align with great music events in the U.S. and Canada.
Awesome. And Peter, can you tell us a little bit more about Sponsor My Event? You talked about how you got into it, but what exactly does the platform do?
Sponsor My Event, basically our name is our program also. That means we have a marketplace that brings together event organizers and sponsors. So it works quite easily, quite simple. So organizers, they can sign up their event. It will be published on Sponsor My Event. We, on the other hand, we have a pool of sponsors which are interesting in the events. We give the organizers a visibility, and we provide also platform tools also to manage the whole deal flow. That means the event organizer can basically handle the deal flow, the contact with the sponsor from A to Z, including at the end of the day also the payments. So that's basically the marketplace functionality. On the other hand, we operate also as kind of an agency. That means we also work hands-on for selected bigger events where we really work like the classic typical sponsorship agency, so that we can join forces actually from these two sides.
Awesome. Now, I know that one question the Event Icons hosts like to ask is, if you weren't in the events industry, what would you be doing? I think it's interesting that you both mentioned music in your introduction. Is that something you guys would love to be doing if you weren't in the events industry, or maybe you do it on the side? Or if not, what else would you guys be doing?
Peter?
Well, my problem is always that I'm extremely interested in a lot of different things. So sometimes I thought I could have become a politician also. A horrible idea, I know, but no, I'm still very interested in politics. Well, yeah. So that would be one of the options. No, the other option is I was and I'm still running a second company, which is a video production company. So all the audiovisual stuff, it's definitely also more a passion than a job, I would say. It's quite fascinating what you can do today with technology, cheaper cameras, excellent quality and everything. The whole drone business, all these things are fascinating, and it comes also together with the music industry, of course. So music was always my passion. It will always remain my passion, even though for the moment I had to put it more or less in the shelf, one of the shelves which you see behind here, because I simply don't find the time anymore to do anything. But it was definitely one of the options that I considered also when I came to choosing a profession, and now finally I ended up with sponsorship. But I must say there could have been also other things in my life.
Yeah, it sounds like you don't have that much to do. You're involved in quite a bit.
My life is totally boring. So,
Liz, how about you?
I probably would work in the music industry, not as a musician, but perhaps as like an attorney, an agent, something along those lines. I would have stayed in that genre, because it is, I think to me, it's always evolving, always changing, fresh. Gives you the opportunity to get out of it what you put into it, which is refreshing, and to have the ability to create and find fresh talent. So,
and I'm sure you've learned a lot about kind of the back end of that stuff while having to deal with music festivals in general.
Yeah, yeah.
It's always a good sign when you want to do more of that and you don't want to just get away from it.
The event business is magical. You know, people take their hard-earned money and they trust you to give them a once-in-a-lifetime experience. And I mean, so that to me is fun.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why we do what we do, right?
Right.
Now, let's talk. Go ahead.
No, you're right. No, you're good.
Let's talk about sponsorships a little bit. One question I have for you guys is, I want to talk about the good side of sponsorships, because I feel like when this topic comes up, it often becomes like, oh, it's hard to get the money and it's hard to satisfy sponsors and there's a lot of challenges. But, you know, sponsors make events happen. What are some of the things that you think people love about sponsorships? And that could be on the planner side, the attendee side, even the sponsor side. Why is it so good?
Well, I feel that a good sponsorship simply can bring a real true added value to the event, and that's what people like. If the attendees see that there is a sponsor who's contributing to the event, who's just bringing with his involvement the event itself to a complete different level, which can perfectly happen also, and which is not necessarily completely transforming an event from something boring to something exciting, but where at the end of the day the attendee goes home and says, wow, this event was great because also there was this sponsor in, he came with a great idea, he made me smile, he made me laugh, or whatever, simply that he brings emotions in also to the event. So that's something where I believe that sponsorship can change an event to the better, which is of course only taking place when the sponsorship is executed in a good way.
And I agree that I think it adds, first of all, I think it adds a great deal of credibility to the event. When you tie in a national product or even a well-respected product, I think people look at that and say, you know, that's great. There's a lot of credibility there. I love when sponsors engage. I hate when sponsors just write the check and don't engage, because to me, I look at every sponsorship, as Peter mentioned, as an added entertainment value to the client there. And there are some people that do it really well, and there are some people that do it, in my opinion, not so well. And it doesn't matter how much money you spend. And I don't know what Peter's general rule of thumb is, but I believe that there is a good formula. If you're spending $100,000 on a sponsorship, you better expect to spend a good chunk in addition to that, at least half of that, if not equal amount, to activate and engage the sponsors. Or so your budget really isn't $100,000, in my opinion, to activate that sponsorship and to secure it, because otherwise you're not doing your investment justice, and then it's hard for us to show our return on energy, return on investment. I don't know how Peter feels about that.
Well, it's totally right. I mean, the money is one thing, but the involvement is something completely different. I mean, you mentioned 100K. We had recently, we arranged a very small sponsorship. It was somewhere in Southern California. It was an event, and the sponsorship was not even $1,000. But the fantastic thing about it was that the sponsor came in. He saw a real opportunity in this event. He was coming in. It was actually a sponsor who was manufacturing creams for hair, for the face, etc. And they were coming in and they were branding their products according to the event. So with the event logo, it says they were really getting involved into it, and they were making it kind of special. So I must say, I was stunned really, because I saw actually that they were spending just $500, $600 on it, but they made a maximum out of it. They were publishing everything on the social media later on. They created a buzz around, and I say, wow. That was really an amazing example that you don't necessarily need to spend an enormous amount of money just to get the visibility, if just you believe in it, if just you feel the event, and if just simply you go for it. For sure, you can also spend 100,000 simply and just completely ruining everything because you're just writing the check, as you say, Liz.
Right, right. And I love that. I think whenever you can give someone something that they care about, and it could be something, it doesn't even matter what it is, but when people can walk away with something that they look at and go, that was really cool. I mean, I tend to work with a lot of liquor companies, and we do a lot of sampling on site at festivals when it's legal. And believe it or not, a quarter-ounce shot of alcohol, you'd think you gave people a bottle. You know, they're thinking, I just got a free shot of Fireball, you know, it's all that, right? And I think for me, whenever you can give the consumer something, it doesn't matter if it's a tchotchke or something as cool as like Peter mentioned, that adds value to the event. And I truly believe sponsorship is a value added in addition to the cash. It's all about the experience.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and it should help better engage your attendees. I think that's why, you know, so many sponsors used to just give their logos and people would put them all over the event. And not only was it probably not getting much of a return for the sponsors, but there's no added value for the attendees. They're not having a better experience.
Right, right.
Absolutely. It's actually Kim Skilden-Wright from Power Sponsorships. She was creating this formula that it has to be a win-win-win situation. So win for the sponsor, win for the organizer, but also win for the attendees. And that's something which I'm always preaching when I'm speaking to event organizers. Come on, make sure that the sponsor is getting in and he's bringing this added value. So that's something which is so important and so often, unfortunately, neglected today.
A brilliant, brilliant point.
Yeah. So what else do you guys think is wrong with sponsorships today? What are some of the things that people hate about sponsorships? What are some of the things that we feel like people are just not doing very well? We've mentioned a few things already, but what else do you have?
How much time do we have?
You have plenty of time.
Honestly, what I personally hate is when I see the classic temple saying, "So I'm going to hang a banner and everything will be good." So I start to hate it because that's so boring in the meanwhile, and you see it's a majority of the events that simply it's executed in a very boring way. Sometimes the sponsors are not even present at the event itself, so they're just having logos somewhere and expect that the people are flocking in and just buying something because just simply there is a logo hanging there, and that's something which is a disease actually in the sponsorship industry, which luckily is changing, but it takes a lot of time also to change it.
Well, and to piggyback on what Peter just said, someone that offers a discount or a bounce back to come back into their place to purchase something because they were at the event, but that they don't support it with their social media. They don't support it by engaging the people. They do it, what I would say, in a passive way, as opposed to an active integration of anything that they do. Anything that's passive, essentially, to me, has a very small percentage of hitting its mark. Would you agree with that, Peter?
Absolutely.
Anything that's passive. And so I think the challenge is on two sides. The challenge for me right now is getting the festival promoters to see that they have to step up their game and bring more to the table as far as what their a little creativity, right? And luckily for me, most of our promoters take advice and direction on that, and they're all about it. But then secondly, more importantly, we have to be able to get the sponsors to understand that nothing's cookie cutter. Like Peter said, it's a win-win-win. And so what can we bring to them, and what can they ask for? It's when they don't want the things that might take a little energy from their team that it's a red flag for me.
And sometimes it doesn't require so much to shift a boring sponsorship to a very interactive and very interesting sponsorship. So that's a funny thing. And sometimes when you discuss with an event organizer or a sponsor and you just drop some interesting ideas, it's kind of, for them, it's an eye-opener, actually. All of a sudden they're there and they say, oh, wow, that's not difficult to implement, but we're going to do it. So I was just recently, I was doing the consulting for an event organizer. It was actually also kind of a music festival. And they had this typical sponsorship, just hanging the banner, being present somewhere there. And I came up with the idea, so if you're already organizing a music festival, you have 25 bands who are playing there. It was also kind of a country music festival. And I said, why are you not going to simply have a reserved area, which is kind of a VIP area, where you're going to make some dedicated VIP concert, where you're going to have one of the stars that you have on stage, which is playing just for half an hour or 45 minutes in front of a selected audience where the sponsor can bring in some people. Or why not making, for example, something else which is a little bit more interactive for the children, simply some country star who's going to sit there and who's going to teach them half an hour, 45 minutes, how to play the first chords on the guitar, something like this. It doesn't cost a lot of money, but it will simply bring a lot to the sponsor, and you can brand the whole area like this on the sponsor. And these are the small ideas which are not costing a lot, but which can completely change and transform the sponsorship as well.
I agree.
Yeah. So talking about that, how do you guys feel about sponsorship tiers? You know, I think there's a standard $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, and I think there's a lot of conversation about it gives sponsors something to think about. It lets them see what the budgets look like and what they might get. But on the flip side of that, it's kind of limiting when it comes to the creative side of things. So, Liz, when you're approaching a brand and trying to get some sponsorship, what's the best way to get them engaged and thinking about the different opportunities, but not leaving it so open because there's no packages, there's nothing for them to look at? How do you find that balance?
Well, I started in this business 25 years ago with the cookie cutter. You can be the platinum, the gold, or the silver sponsor, right? And I'm not a huge believer in, I think there's a time and a place for the tiers. I've gotten to the point now with the corporate sponsors where I think it's a conversation first of identifying what their needs, their interests are, kind of laying out the pieces of real estate on the table for them, and then determining, they've got to be willing to trust me with the budget talk. And I'm always a believer that you walk before you run. And if I want to get someone involved, you know, I'd rather get them in at $25,000 in the first year and move them to a $50,000 sponsorship in the next year than to get them in at $50,000 and have them be disappointed in the return. And I actually just closed a deal today on a major car dealer for a festival that we do in Nevada. And part of the gist on that was they're not getting anything more, but they see that well, let me take that back. They are getting more because there's much more engagement with the audience, but it wasn't so much about the deliverables and the elements in the package as it was how can we get in and touch the consumers 9 months out of the year or 12 months out of the year instead of just at the festival. So we sat down and really developed that program, and they saw the value in more that than they did in adding tickets, for example, which is a hard cost to the event. So I'm a believer that you have to have that conversation, and you have to be willing to say, listen, I'd like to see you come in at $20,000 or $50,000, and they can either balk or they can, sometimes I do it wrong, but I do think when you lay it on the table, if you put a $10,000 package on the table and they were expecting to come in at $25,000, it's kind of a bad deal for you, right? So I do think that I tend to want to go a little bit higher when I come in and then work it backwards, but I hate to make it so concrete. Listen, everybody, it's never the same. Would you not agree, Peter? Like, I don't think I've ever had the same experience.
I couldn't agree more with you. No, honestly, I know that people and many sponsors, they still expect to have in the first pitch that they receive kind of the different tiers, etc., which might be a nice indication or a guideline at the beginning, but at the end of the day, it's something which is just an indication. So I have rarely seen, especially for the bigger events, that anybody was buying a sponsorship package, a premium package or a gold package or whatever it is, just as it was indicated or advertised at the beginning. So that's something which is always something which is subject to negotiations, and I always speak also with the event organizers, and no matter with whom I speak, I tell them right from the beginning, you need to be ready to negotiate also. You need to be ready to make your tailor-made packages, because each and every sponsor has some special requirements, some particular requirements. And I found it much more interesting and compelling also that you take into account also what kind of sponsor you have in front of you, because every company comes from a different industry. Every different industry has different requirements and maybe also certain ideas. And if you can tailor-make your sponsorship package towards this industry, just taking into account these specific these particular elements from the industry, then you can create something which is truly unique, and that becomes much more important than just simply having an over-the-counter recipe, basically, that you can sell just like this. So its customization is very important. On the other hand, I still know that that many companies, they expect simply to have the standard packages, even though they are just an indication. But maybe it's also in our human behavior that we want to have something, a certain price. It's the same as when I go to a car dealer. I know very well that the advertised car, it starts at 25 grand. But well, everybody knows that we will never buy this car in 25 grand, because we're going to add here, we're going to add there, and so we're going to add with maybe 35 grand. So that's probably the same in the sponsorship industry. There are some packages, but they're just an idea at the beginning where you could start, and from there you have to take it, you have to individualize, you have to customize them, you have to work on them, and you have to present something to the sponsor. That's why also right from the beginning, actually, on Sponsor My Event, we have integrated a proposal editor, where it's quite easy also for the event organizers just to make these tailor-made proposals, because we see that most of the time the packages are not sold just as they were advertised at the beginning.
So Peter, how does that work with a platform like Sponsor My Event, where, at least from what I remember, and correct me if I'm wrong, you as the organizer can go in and put in various packages so that when companies are looking, they get a sense. How does that negotiation process work with a platform where a lot of this is kind of automated and sped up so that those marriages happen faster? Is there still the same ability to be so creative, and how does that work on your platform?
Yes, it's totally creative. So first of all, the packages that you can put in there, they're in indications. So basically, they just give an idea of what kind of fork basically you will have when you come in as a sponsor, what kind of possibilities. And then what we emphasize always on, nothing can be sold on Sponsor My Event without having a negotiation. So it's not possible just to simply to select a package and to buy it like this. You always have to reach out as a sponsor to the event organizer, and that's also the part where we come in, because it's not only a marketplace where everything is fully automatized, because what we do is actually more kind of a managed marketplace. So we handle the negotiation. So as soon as a negotiation request comes in from a sponsor, we see it, we review it if it's not spam, which can happen as well, and then from this point on, we establish a direct contact between the organizer and the sponsor. And the typical procedure is always that we arrange a call between them, and if anyhow possible, one of us is also in the call present, simply to guide it and also to give the right indications, because sometimes you have to do it with first-time event organizers who don't have the skills to negotiate with the sponsors. Sometimes it's also sponsors who have never done any sponsorship before. And like this, we are there to guide them, to help them to customize the offer according to the sponsor's needs. And then also subsequently, after this first introduction call, also to help them to use our proposal editor to create this tailor-made proposal, so that the sponsorship in any moment, at any moment, becomes something very individual also, even though we're using a platform which is supposed to be, of course, highly automatized, but which still has this tailor-made component built in.
That's brilliant. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's great. Now, I'm going to ask you guys a question that I'm really curious about. I plan events, of course, and so I have that experience with our clients, or even with events that we run, where you want to put together your media kit and have some options for sponsorships. And the question always comes to me, and I honestly don't know how to answer it, so I'm hoping you guys can tell me. How do you price it out? Like, obviously, you can assume that certain things have certain value, but I think there's always that fear. Liz, you talked about this, that you pitch something that's $10,000 and the sponsor totally would have spent $30,000. Or vice versa. You pitch a $50,000 package and they were going to come in at $5,000, so they just are not interested at all. How do you value the packages that you're laying out, and how do you kind of read that? Do you know, repackage it for a company that's a lot bigger and has a bigger budget, and then just shrink the dollar amount and give the same package to a smaller company? How do you guys do that, or what do you think is the best practice?
Right, you want to do it?
Yeah.
Well, okay. Well, first of all, let me just say one thing, and then I'll let Peter jump on this, because I'm sure he has a little bit more scientific mindset on this than I do. I think the one thing is, not everyone values everything the same. So what might be worth $1,000 to one sponsor may be worth $10,000 to another, maybe worth $0 to another. So I'm always hesitant to include the value on a proposal, because if they take that one element out, then are they trying to renegotiate using that price? Other than a hard media cost, if you can show hard media costs like inclusion in an ad, a television commercial, 8-second tag in a radio spot, things like that, those are a little bit easier to value, but there are a lot of arbitrary values. And a lot of times, and I'm sure Peter can attest to this, when you're dealing with agencies, they will want to look at exactly everything in order for them to come up with their valuation on it. And it's interesting because you can have two major advertising agencies that will take the same package and value the elements completely differently.
Absolutely.
So, Peter, I don't know, you might have a very succinct formula that you utilize. You have to, probably.
Not necessarily, because on a platform like Sponsor My Event, it's always up to the event organizer to define what kind of prices they want to apply. So it's not necessarily directly our business to do it.
Right.
Yet we are consulting, of course, your event organizer when it comes to these things. So there is, if you want to call it like this, more kind of the scientific component in, which is the cost covering, of course. So every event organizer needs, first of all, to make sure that with the sponsorship which comes in, that the costs are correctly covered. You need to have a certain buffer as well, so that you can be sure also, even though something might happen, simply you have a certain margin. So that's more the scientific thing. Then I also urge the event organizers to always consider the return of investment, the ROI from the sponsor side, because you cannot just put some very high numbers which are absolutely not justified, and where the sponsor will never generate a positive return of investment with it. So that's something which is also very important to consider from the organizer side when it comes to price the sponsorship packages. And then of course, when I would say during the negotiation itself, it's always a question of feeling. You need to sell your packages, and you need to feel what kind of sponsor you have in front of you. What is he willing to go for? Yet me as a person also who's doing business development, who's doing sales, of course, I know very well that you need to be very careful not to underprice actually your own services that you provide. Which is a big risk, actually, that all of a sudden you go down with the price just because you want to bring in the sponsor, and all of a sudden you're ending up with something that you have sold for nothing. You have a wonderful sponsor in, he got it for free basically, and you're not covering your costs anymore. So I think it's very important to know exactly as an event organizer what you need to have. There is a bottom line. You cannot go below simply. And you should also definitely not be afraid of simply walking away from a deal where you feel it's a bad deal for me. Because I had it a couple of times actually where we had some bigger companies also, and they were in contact with the event organizers, and one of the first things they said, we don't have a budget actually. So which is something that I truly didn't believe, because I knew clearly well they had a budget for it, but they were just right from the beginning trying to push everything down. And so I was quite firm in the negotiations also with them, and at the end of the day it was a couple of times where simply the deal was not taking place simply because it was not possible to come closer to what their expectations were. And so like this we walked away without any deal, and I'm still very happy that we did it, because it would have been a bad deal otherwise. But still, it's something which is kind of a science, and well, yeah.
I know I've had that experience with clients where, you know, they'll say, how much are your event planning services? And I'll tell them, and they're like, oh, that's way too high, you have to come down. And I remember the first time I was like, no, I'm just not going to come down. That's our price. And what was interesting is we just kept proving ourselves that we do this work, and 3 years later they came back and paid our price. And I think it was just they see the value, you know, as long as you kind of stick to what you say you're going to offer, you grow that event, those sponsors that you turn down might very well come back to you one day.
It's also one of the things that I have learned is quite interesting, that some companies, especially bigger ones, are absolutely not interested even to go to events where the sponsorship packages are very low. So they want to have something which is considerable, which is bringing them a solid return of investment, of course. And I had recently, I was speaking with an event organizer also, and his prices were actually ridiculously low. So, and I said, are you really sure that you don't want to add maybe a couple of packages which are higher priced? I mean, add something for 10K, for 15K, 20K or so. He was surprised. He said, no, but I cannot ask for so much. I said, why not? I mean, you have an event which brings a great visibility. So do something, because bigger companies are not necessarily going to move the needle for $500. So that's something also to consider.
I run into situations on my aspect of it where a festival might come back and say, we don't want to pay you this percentage that you take as your fee. And I say, I completely understand that. 100% of nothing is nothing. So, and I mean, listen, you guys, and I'm sure you can understand this being an event side, Liz and Peter, it takes just as much energy to close a deal for $5,000 and to service that deal as it does to close a $50,000 deal, a $100,000 deal, and to service that. I treat every single deal as if they are the deal. And I'm working on a deal right now that's a $3,000 deal, and today I was almost like, really? Like, how much energy am I putting into this? But again, $3,000 deals turn into big deals down the road if they're taken care of, right?
Absolutely.
So, but I do think, Liz, the one thing that I have found is sometimes there's no wrong valuation. It's when you know who you're talking to, then you can determine what valuation you use. You know, unfortunately, when I started out in the entertainment or in the sponsorship business, I put most of the sponsorship value on tickets, hard costs, because I didn't understand what all the ancillary pieces were 25 years ago. And then it's hard to break away from that when you build a lot of your packages around hard things such as tickets.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. I have a lot of questions for you, but we do have a good question that came in from our audience, so I want to make sure we jump to that real quick. Nathan is listening, and it sounds like he works for or owns a live streaming company. He says, our live streaming company has been approached on numerous occasions about donating their services as a sponsor, I guess in kind, but the services are B2B, so they've never felt that they're going to see an ROI from that type of sponsorship. That's not how their customers choose them, and most of their clients are going through a procurement process. So do you guys think he's way out of line, or does that make sense? Any thoughts on that?
Liz, what about you?
Okay, so interestingly enough, we have been approached by 3 very good live streaming companies, solid live streaming companies in North America, to get involved in the festivals that we're doing. The first challenge, obviously, there's a large cost involved in live streaming the events, but the other challenge that you have with the music festivals is getting the artists to agree to the live streaming, because they want to be able to control their sound, control the cost. We can have the best production in the world, but the artist does not want to come across. They want to be able. Live streaming means it's live, and if it doesn't sound right, it's live. You can't take it back. So that has been our challenge. We've been meeting with a lot of artist managers. A lot of that decision we're finding is being made at the record label level, and so we're trying to get around that. We have 2 live stream companies that we're speaking with that have offered to bring in the corporate sponsorship to offset the costs so that live streaming can become a revenue stream. And I think that it's a matter of months before we're involved in deals like that. So in a situation, is the festival willing to pay for the live streaming? And listen, if it's done properly, it can be a great revenue stream. It's an added value to the sponsors, all those elements. But I think for the festivals that we represent right now, most of them are looking at it saying, how can we cover the cost of this through event or live streaming sponsorship? So any company that's bringing that opportunity to the table to help us procure additional sponsors above and beyond our existing sponsorship revenue stream, those are the ones that we're probably going to end up working with.
Well, from my side, when it comes to, in general, to in-kind sponsorship, I must honestly say I have kind of mixed feelings towards it. So I see that in-kind sponsorship in general, not necessarily now from a live streaming business, but in general, can be a great opportunity for companies to get into an event, get a lot of visibility, and maybe open some new markets also, which is a brilliant opportunity without having to spend a lot of money. I was just yesterday arranging a smaller sponsorship, an in-kind sponsorship in Singapore, which was actually for a student association who are organizing a bigger conference, and there was another company actually who's quite new on the market, and they wanted to provide the t-shirts, so printed t-shirts for this event, and they would say, okay, we're going to do this as an in-kind sponsorship, which I believe is a brilliant opportunity in this case, because they are new on the market. They want to get some visibility, some reference projects, of course, and here it makes perfect sense. Now in this case with the live streaming, if Nathan doesn't see right away a value for him, added value, then I would not even consider it in this case, because if already he has difficulties to see the value, what it could bring for him, then most likely there is no value for him in this case. It might work on other places, but in his specific sector, definitely I don't see a real opportunity here in this case. If it comes to other festivals or so, there might be other problems which might be involved, just as you said, with the rights also to stream, or the problems that musicians might have with it. But you always need to evaluate very clearly whether it really will bring an added value for yourself as well, or if it's just simply going in. Another aspect that I see also quite often, unfortunately, when it comes to in-kind sponsorship is that bigger companies are using it very often just to get a lot of visibility just for nothing, and kind of abusing also on this concept of in-kind sponsorship, pushing it with their big name actually, and we had it a couple of times where they said, no, we're only doing in-kind sponsorship just simply in order to save a lot of money simply. And that's what I consider to be even almost unfair compared to other sponsors.
Yeah, I mean, I think for any company, you know what you would charge for that event, and if you can't at least get the value back, if they're not going to pay you, you should get your value in some other way, whether that's access to their attendee database, if they're willing to give that up, or something that you feel will be helpful to you. And if you can't get a return on that investment, it's still an investment. Even though you're not shelling out $50,000 of a cash sponsorship, like Liz said, there's a lot to a sponsorship. Your time, your services, and all of that needs to be proving the ROI. If you can't find that, I think it's perfectly fine to turn it down.
Although with Nathan's situation, the one thing I would say that it adds a ton of credibility for you to do one music festival, and exposes you to the artists that will need live streaming services, potential companies, and an event. And one of those events showing a successful live streaming situation may be a great entree for additional events.
Yeah, that could be a great return.
Once you give your services away for free, it's difficult to get people to pay for them.
That's always.
Boy,
If you wanted to do one of our festivals, Nathan, we would take care of you.
Get in touch. He says thank you, by the way. You can't see his question, but he does say thank you.
But Liz, you got a brilliant point, Liz, here also when you say when you start giving away your products for free, the news about this spread very quickly, and to move away from this is extremely difficult. So I would be very careful with this.
Yeah, I know that you always, in-kind sponsorships can be really successful, but they can be, horrible too. Speaking about horrible, I like to talk about horror stories and just bad things, because I think whenever event people get together, especially if you have like a drink or two, which I don't think any of us have right now, but if you have a drink or two, you start talking and you're like, oh, remember that time? And before you know it, it's 2 a.m. and a lot of time has passed. When it comes to sponsorships, what are just some of the worst things you've seen? Of course, you don't have to name clients or anything. It could be things that planners need to do better, or sponsors, but just any horror stories you guys want to share?
I remember one story. It was well, maybe not really a horror story, but I was still very, very angry, because it was quite an interesting deal that we had been working on. It was for a 5K run. I think it was a 5K run that we were organizing the sponsorship for, and so we had a sponsor. He agreed. It was actually quite short time, so it was more or less 1.5 weeks before the event was taking place. So it was really very quickly arranged. Everything was fine. Contract was signed even, and it was also one of the main component of the sponsorship deal was simply that the sponsor had to be present at the event itself, and at the finish line they wanted to showcase their products. So everything was okay. And just the day of the event, all of a sudden the sponsor simply, just like this, walked away from the deal, because he said, oh, we are not able to bring in the products to showcase the samples just on time. So they canceled everything, and they used also a condition in the contract, which was not done by us, by the way, which were allowing them to do this. So basically, they didn't pay any money for it. They left alone the whole event organizer. The organizer was very angry at us in this case, because we had established the contact. So basically they were blaming us for doing this. So I remember I was just sitting the moment where this horrible thing happened. I was just sitting in a restaurant. I was eating a pizza. I got the message. I got the phone call. And I was sitting there and I said, holy crap, this cannot be now, really. It was really literally at the finish line, the last day possible, where everything simply was not taking place. So it's something which is just a small thing when I look back today, but still it was something which was emotionally draining for me, and I was for once I was extremely angry. So I don't envy the waiter who was around that moment at the restaurant, because I can become very angry in these moments. That was one of the smaller horror stories. I mean, there are many other stories, but this one I will always remember because I was frustrated that moment.
It counts as a horror story if you can remember where you are when it happened.
Yeah, that's
that definitely counts.
Well, I'll tell you, I have two that are pretty interesting, and one is pretty basic, and I would chalk this up to, well, I'll tell it to you and you can figure out what I said. I had an oil company that was sponsoring a music festival, and they sent me, the sponsors pay me, my company, I take my percentage, then pay the event immediately following the event, after I've ensured that all the sponsors' needs have been met. So should something happen, there's an issue, I can go and negotiate back with the sponsor. Never had any issues, right? So the oil company pays me 3 times for a sponsorship. 3 times. So I don't get a check for $50,000. I get 3 checks for $50,000.
Oh, bonus.
Right. So I'm thinking to myself, what am I supposed to, you know? So I contacted the accounting person at the company and my person that I was dealing with, and I said, I have been paid 3 times for this event. So I'm going to send back $100,000 to you, right? I'll be sending that money back. Well, this got my person fired.
Oh, no.
Ooh.
So, in retrospect, what I should have done, had I thought about this, was say, thank you so much for prepaying for your partnership for the next 2 years, right? I didn't think that through, right? And I called someone else who worked in the oil company, in this oil company, and said, what should I have done? Because I thought I was doing the honest, right thing. But this person lost her job over it. So that was mortifying to me, right? But I think my lesson was, and I've had it happen since, that does happen, right? If people pay twice, I say thank you so much. I'll apply it towards next year's sponsorship.
That's genius. That happened to me this year, and I totally sent it back. But we could have been moving on next year already.
Just a heads up. That was one thing. And I said, what if I had done that? They would have been, that's fine. Because the problem was, once it's out of the budget, it's spent, right? When you put it back in the budget, then they don't have it for next year, right? Do you see what I'm getting at?
Yeah, I think so.
So I have some companies that pay me in advance so that they can drain their budget because they trust me. Then I just apply it for next year for their deals.
Interesting.
Which is kind of a nice thing, I guess. Then the other thing that happened to me that is crazy is I had a major company in the U.S. that is an energy drink. And the guys were having a really great time at the festival, and they left their on-site area with hundreds of cases of product in it, and the festival people all saw this, so they started carrying cases of the products out of the festival grounds. And the sponsor called his boss and said that they were held up and robbed at the festival.
Oh.
Right? The matter was, these guys were having a really great time in the campgrounds and had left their post. So unfortunately for me, that put a black eye on the festival, and I've never gotten that money back again. So, and I'm not going to go and throw this guy under the bus, but it was wrong. What happened was wrong.
Yeah.
So I've had a couple bad issues, but nothing terrible.
One of the things I think that happened also to each and every one of us. I have a friend of mine. It happened to him almost the same thing. Also, we're negotiating on a very big deal. Actually, it was a big brewery for a concert in Manhattan, and everything was working so well, and it was almost perfect. So we were very close to having the deal, and all of a sudden, there was a moment of silence. So all of a sudden we couldn't reach anymore our contact person at the brewery, so there was absolutely nothing, and it took actually 2 weeks till we got the notification from them that this person was simply not working anymore at the brewery. So our contact person has completely disappeared. It was replaced by some other person, and obviously this person was absolutely not interested in the deal, so the deal never took place, but also very frustrating if you're working for 3 months on a deal, and then all of a sudden just a person just without any notification or so just leaves, and you're sitting there just like someone in the Sahara actually, and without any water anymore. So you just feel like crap that moment.
That's when the event industry turnover rate does not help.
Exactly.
Not at all. Now, if you guys could give one piece of advice to event planners, what would it be? It could be sponsorship related, but this is a fun conversation, so it could be whatever.
Well, my advice would clearly be, first of all, don't take everything so seriously. Take it relaxed and with a deep breath. That's something which is pretty important, I would would say. So we are all humans, and like this, treat humans like humans and not like machines. No, but a little bit more serious advice that I would have is clearly for event organizers when it comes to sponsorship. Put yourself in the position of the sponsor and try to visualize your own event from the sponsor's perspective. That will help enormously to pinpoint what the sponsor might be interested in. It will help you enormously also to better sell your event, because you will all of a sudden you will see things in your event where you say, oh, this is a place where he might want to get the visibility. This is something where I can improve something. This is something where I can add an interactive component, or all these things like this. So if you try to make this exercise, which is not easy to do actually, but if you try to put yourself into the position of the sponsor and you see with a critical eye also your own event, then you might discover a lot of things which might be very important when you start negotiating with any sponsor which is out there.
My thought process on that would be to echo what Peter said, but also my mantra is under promise and over deliver, and give them a taste of the sex part of the festival. Give them one meet and greet with an artist. Make them want more so that they come to the table the next year asking for a little bit more. But if you under promise and over deliver, set your boundaries and your parameters so that they're not feeling like they can come back. Don't say yes to everything. Say yes to the right thing. You know, when someone has an additional ask, make sure that it's the ask that's going to take you to the next level, not the ask that's just going to take care of the wife. Do you know what I mean? I mean, like, really make it count so that they get what you're giving them. I find that if I give one person a meet and greet to meet every single artist, by the third meet and greet, it's old hat. It's no longer magical. If I give 3 people a meet and greet to meet artists, they all are having a magical experience. So the other thing that I think is really important, it is a lot harder to get a new sponsor than it is to take care of an existing sponsor. And so often you can overlook a sponsor. Doesn't matter if it's a $1,000 sponsor or a $20,000 sponsor, just take care of them and they'll be back. Because I'll tell you what, it's hard to get new ones. You know, it's just Absolutely. As much work or more. Yeah. So I'm a huge proponent in customer service.
That's great.
I couldn't agree more, yeah. That's definitely something which is very often neglected by event organizers. Also just following up, delivering correct reports also after the sponsorship has been fulfilled, all these things. After the event is before the event. Very simple.
Yeah. I always remind people that the event is not over the time it's over. That's when the other half of the work starts, and collecting all of that data and figuring out how to present it. I think one challenge for so many planners is not only collecting lots of information about the success of your event, but marketing that to the sponsors who just paid you to be a part of their event. You don't want to just kind of thank you and see you next year, but how can you take the experience that you've created, all that time that you spent building something that created a great experience for your attendees, and how can you show that off so people feel like, wow, that was a great event to be part of, can't wait to do it again next year. Yeah. But I think, you know, you're on to the next, so it's like easy to forget to do that. What's one tip that you guys would have on the sponsor side for sponsors, if just one thing they could be doing better? I'll start and give you a second to think about it, because I had one on my mind. One thing I think sponsors could do a better job of is tracking their participation in events. Obviously, it's great for the client to give you a lot of data, but for example, you know, hey, can you send a newsletter blast? And they'll give you like the link to their website. And like, that's completely not trackable. So if you want to track how much business is coming, you can create a unique URL and send that, and that will really help. So they don't really know how to do that sometimes, and I feel like they're missing opportunities to track how successful their sponsorships are.
Right on, Liz.
Any other thoughts?
Well, I could. My first thought was actually also what you said now, Liz. It's very easy today to create some landing pages specifically designed for some events. For sure, the bigger the involvement in the sponsor in the event is, the more sense it makes to put some energy in creating a whole microcosm, some microsites around this. But it's very important that you, as a sponsor, you kind of extend the event beyond the boundaries of the event itself. If you provide additional information on a dedicated landing page, if you give some added values like this through these channels on the social media, etc., if you're using these elements very wisely, then you will also remain in the memory of the people, and you will create something which is lasting also the experience, because especially if you create content which is valuable, this content will remain longer on the internet. It can remain even for years, I would say, and can bring you a consistent contact also with potential clients. That's why I would urge also event sponsors not only to consider the return of investment, but also the return on objectives. So that's something which is, as measurement becomes much more important. It's not only to make the quick sell in this case, but it's also to build up a followership, to create loyal followers. I'm a big fan of inbound marketing, and I think if sponsors would inspire themselves of the concept of inbound marketing and apply it as a kind of an inbound sponsorship, then they could really build up something which is long-lasting in this case.
You guys both nailed it. That was brilliant. I agree completely. I really think telling sponsors, first of all, if they would utilize their marketing platforms as well to help market the events, even like their social media channels, I think that's very helpful to events. But giving them an opportunity, content was huge. Peter, that's right on. You know, that's right the level, and getting them to understand that I have a sponsor that takes an entertainer, and the patrons have the opportunity to get a selfie taken with the entertainer, right? But in order for the patron to get that particular selfie, they should have to go through the sponsor's channel to get the selfie so that they capture that data. They haven't done that in the past. We're talking about a major corporation that didn't do that. Then they're saying, well, we didn't capture that much data. Well, I'm not going to tell you to do your job, but, right? So I think anything we can do, and once we give them those ideas, and then hope that they actually execute them, because I think there's so much they're leaving on the table.
Okay, well, you guys are geniuses, and I've so enjoyed talking to you. I can't believe we're at the end of our time almost. But I do want to give you one final question before we wrap up. What is one thing that you're obsessed with now? It could be a website, a resource, a blog that you love reading, a book you read. What's one thing that you're obsessed with that you think other people should check out? And it doesn't have to be sponsorship related.
Ladies first, I would say.
You guys are like, I'm not obsessed with anything.
Oh.
No. Or too many things, probably, knowing the two of you.
You know what? I'm obsessed with learning the mindset of social media. Like, I am so intrigued. I have two daughters that are, you know, will look at posts that events that I work with will do, and they'll be like, that's terrible. Right? I'm obsessed with understanding the who, what, where, why, and when of why the consumer practices have changed so much. And the competition in the U.S. is ridiculous, Peter, as far as for the entertainment dollar. There's a concert all the time, 24/7. So what sets your event apart? And it's all about creating that event experience. And the one thing that I know that they do very well, for example, in the UK and in Europe, is create these really incredible fan experiences. And I'm very intrigued with how can you take that and scale it for the different size events that we do here in the U.S. and Canada. I'm just intrigued to figure out how you can do that. I do think that the sponsorship integration, the sponsorship experience adds to that, which is why I think I'm in a cool aspect of the business on top of just the entertainment that you have there. I mean, that's probably pretty lame, but.
Not at all.
Makes perfect sense. Well, from my side, I'm always a little bit tech addicted, marketing addicted, I must say, and when it comes to combine everything into sales, I was looking for a long time. I was looking really for a CRM that would match my requirements and that I would like to use really. And I was trying many of them, and honestly I hated almost all of them. So it was quite difficult also for me to recommend any CRMs to any organizers. And in the meanwhile, I found HubSpot CRM, which is a brilliant tool. It's also, by the way, for free, so I don't get even any money now for advertising it a little bit. So it's just simply a crush and a half for this CRM, and I recommend it quite often also to event organizers, because I see that many event organizers, when they start reaching out to sponsors, they're completely unorganized. So and then I say, use it simply. It has a certain steep learning curve, but if you want to do it seriously, just use it. Use all the tools which are available. Not only now the HubSpot CRM, but use also tools like Todoist, use your calendar, use Google, etc. You have all these tools, many of them which are coming simply for free, and if you use this combination, you can be so super efficient also compared to what you can do if you're not using these tools. On a more personal level, I must say something that we like at the office, just to distract us from time to time. We're just very busy, as you can imagine, and sometimes we love to play with this thing here at the office, which is just something very simple, a little bit old-fashioned actually. Today it should be actually more kind of a drone, but this thing is actually something which is fantastic. Sometimes we're spending 10-15 minutes till the batteries are empty, sitting here at the office, trying to land it on many different smaller items, which is actually quite difficult to do it, especially when you come closer to a wall. So we crashed it quite a couple of times already, but it's these moments where you simply say, okay, this is just bringing us away for 5-10 minutes from the normal buzz that we have at the office. So it's definitely something that I would recommend. It's kind of our stress ball in this case.
Sounds like the perfect video social media account. Yeah. You can, take videos of different people in your office landing it on different things.
No. It's actually it's old-fashioned. It doesn't even have a camera included. It's just the fun of flying.
No, you have to take a video with your phone of it.
Oh yeah, this can be possible. Yeah, absolutely.
You can have like a viral following on Instagram or something.
Indeed. We never tried it actually, so it was just our private game here. So.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but I would love for the people who've listened to this show, both live and to continue to listen to it, to get in touch with you guys. I think you are clearly both geniuses, and I'm sure we will continue to stay in touch. So join us for the next show next Wednesday, and until then, you can catch all the recordings. We look forward to seeing you on the next show.
Hey, great to meet you guys. Take care. Congrats on your wedding, Liz.
Thank you for joining us for another amazing episode of #Event Icons. To catch the transcription and all of the resources mentioned, head to www.helloendless.com/blog. This week's episode will be posted and available by next Tuesday. Also, let us know what you thought about this week's episode. Share your biggest takeaway and join the Twitter conversation sponsored by Alex Plaxton and Little Bird Told Media. Just tag your post with #Event Icons. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you again for joining us. We'll see you next Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, right here on #Event Icons.
Great. Thank you so much. That was great.
Thanks, guys. Take care, you guys. Have fun.
Likewise. We'll talk soon.
Cool.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care, guys.
Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.